afternoon to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank the EU CBRN Centers of Excellence Initiative for organizing this very important event. My name is Francesco Marelli. As Alex said, I'm head of unit at UNICRI and I'm responsible for CBRN activities, including activities on science and innovation. Let me share my screen and my PowerPoint, because today what I want to do, I want to share with you some slides, a presentation about COVID disinformation. This is something that we have been monitoring at UNICRI since January 2019, so basically since the beginning of COVID. And as I guess most of the speakers also are familiar, with COVID, there was a proliferation of fake news connected to the cause of the disease and the possible cure. Let's say that the particular interest or the particular focus of UNICRI is about disinformation. So let me just give you a very brief definition about what is misinformation and what is disinformation. And I base this on a manual produced by UNESCO. Misinformation is when there is a misleading information created or disseminated without manipulative or malicious intent. So with misinformation, there is not malicious intent. Disinformation is deliberate attempts to confuse or manipulate people. So the difference is that with disinformation, there is intent, there is a deliberate attempt to confuse or manipulate information. And as a part of United Nations that are analyzing and studying the problem of the violent non-state actors, our interest was very much on the role of non-state actors in causing disinformation, in proliferating false information, fake news about COVID. So let me start by saying that we released a report last year in November based on our observation of almost 1 year of the social media. And we identified the three main violent non-state actors which has been operating in the area of COVID disinformation. The first group is what we can define the right-wing extremist groups. So this does not represent, let's say, a coherent or easily defined movement. It is more like a shifting, a complex, overlapping milieu or context of individuals, groups, movements that operate online and offline. And what is the common element of these different individuals, groups, or movement is their message of hate, racism towards minorities, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and in general, the idea that we are close to an inevitable collapse of society and the civil war, which will resulted in the creation of a white ethno-state that will be led, that will be limited to white people. I had to say that this particular non-state actor is particularly, let's say, alarming also because there have been particularly, let's say, particularly good in developing and expanding their conspiracy theories in an attempt to let's say, reach an audience that traditionally is not connected to right-wing views. So, for example, they have been able to include in the rhetoric and the propaganda elements about ufology or about ecology, which has nothing to do with the, let's say, Nazi traditional rhetoric, but they, it was a vehicle to expand their reach and their audience. Second category is composed of a group associated with the Islamic State in Iraq and Levant, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda. So this includes groups such as Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and many others that are or are not connected to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. As a UN, we use this formula to identify this type of terrorism and violent groups. Let's say that this is not something new. Obviously, Al-Qaeda, but in particular ISIL, Daesh, been particularly effective in using or maliciously using social media in the last 10 years. The third category is organized crime. And that's also something that it is not, let's say, new. There have been already groups like, for example, Los Zetas in Mexico, which has been very active in the misuse of social media to promote false information and dissemination. So what do they want? What was basically, the main findings of our research and our report? Well, the first element, is the most obvious, is that they want to undermine trust in government and science. So what they want to do is that they want to use the opportunities of COVID to jeopardize the credibility of the government, to show that the government and science are not able to cope with COVID crisis. There are, of course, also accusations that the government and science are responsible for COVID. And the result, what they want is that they want to undermine all safety and security measures of the government, jeopardizing, for example, the measures such as isolation, lockdown, and now, of course, vaccination. The second element that we found that it is part of the interest and strategic objective of non-state actors is the reinforcement of non-state actors' extremist narrative and recruitment strategies. And this is very much connected to their ability to exploit the advantages offered by social media. So social media has an invisible mechanism to hook us in a sense that through social media we can receive information, news, which are based on our preference, based on our behavior. Every time that we use social media, we leave a digital footprint. And therefore, through social media, you can receive information that are based on your research or your digital footprint. And therefore, this can create a sort of echo chamber in which you share opinion and views with people that have your own perspective, your own behavior. And every time that there is, let's say, an attempt from someone else to come up with an alternative opinion, this is immediately, it is received as a sort of, as an interference, like as a kind of provocation against the mainstream opinion that was created in the echo chamber. So social media, from this point of view, are like a bit like Hotel California of the Eagles, something that you can check out anytime you like, but you cannot leave. And obviously this was an excellent opportunity. COVID, the pandemic, and this situation of isolation was an excellent opportunities for some non-state actors to create and to reinforce these echo chambers where they could feed the audience with COVID-related conspiracy theories and try to radicalize their audience. The third strategic objective is inspire terrorism, and that's definitely the most nasty and malicious use of social media. So this is an attempt to instigate extremists to intentionally spread COVID and use it basically as improvised biological weapons. The third strategic objective that we found is about the promotion of positive image of organizations, in particular, I would say, organized crime organizations that use, use COVID as an opportunity to portray the positive image of organized crime, able to support the population in a moment in which a government was had, let's say, many constraints from economic, from a financial point of view. This is also something that we saw in the past. Organized crime is always interested, or often interested, to portray a positive image, a sort of Robin Hood, supporting poor people. But also we know that this is not true. We know that organized crime is not interested to provide support, but they want to do is just to use these opportunities to generate illegal profits. And I will make some examples to show how they can use COVID to do this type of illegal activities. So what type of social media we'll be monitoring? Well, I would say, let's say the main platform like Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, but also we were interested in the, let's say, small social media or blogs like 4chan or 8chan. And those were particularly interested because in this type of social media, non-violent, non-state actors were able to, let's say, better radicalize their audience, to promote a more violent message, because they know that the level of control is lesser compared to the traditional media. So let me give you some examples. How does it work, disinformation, and why it is so effective? And let me start with the example of Pirbright Institute. And so let's start with the real facts. Pirbright Institute is based in UK. They do research on virus of farm animals. And in 2018, they received a patent for coronavirus chicken. So not the COVID-19, but a different type of coronavirus. And also Pirbright Institute received many funds, including also by the Gates Foundation, for a project which was not connected to the patent of coronavirus chicken. So those are the real facts. Now, in January 2020, a promoter of QAnon conspiracy theories started to spread disinformation about the Pirbright Institute. And the disinformation was that the Pirbright, yes, has a patent, and this patent is about coronavirus COVID-19. They received this, they hold this patent since 2018, and Bill Gates Foundation was funding Pirbright Institute for this particular project connected to the patent of COVID-19. So you can see there is, let's say, a small kernel of truth, because it is true that the Pirbright Institute has a patent. It was funded by Bill Gates Foundation, but there is a completely manipulation information, so that the result is that there is a connection between Pirbright Institute and COVID-19, even though in reality there is not any connection. What is the effect? The effect is that there was a proliferation of fake news about Pirbright. So Pirbright was accused of also having been created and released COVID-19, was based in China, and Wuhan, was owned by Bill Gates, and even they fabricated bioweapons. And on the right side, you can see that there was even a fake website where Pirbright was selling biological weapons. Let me also give an example of echo chamber. Yesterday, just as I was preparing my presentation, I went through some social media. In particular, what I did is that I checked a channel led by a Nazi group, which is called the Corona Channel News, and I I just extrapolated some information just to show how does it work, these echo chambers. So I found these 4 examples that I'm sharing now with you. The first, you can see that there is a professor from University of Hamburg, Roland Wiesendanger, who says that coronavirus has been created in a lab. Now, this information is true, is correct, but what it is not properly said is that this professor is not an expert on virus, and he's an expert in nanoscience, and it is not clear how he came to this conclusion. Second example, you can see now there is unequivocal scientific evidence that COVID virus originated in a laboratory. Okay, let me see now, where does it come from? Unequivocal scientific evidence. And you see that the source is Gateway Pundit, which is a very well-known website of the far right, where there is basically, they produce fake news and conspiracy theories. Then there is a video, so 4 minutes, in which you can see some individuals who are suffering dramatic consequences from the vaccine. And this is very alarming, but there is no evidence that the suffering of these individuals is somehow connected to COVID. And then there is another news that says that there was anti-vax protest in Australia. So giving the impression that the anti-vax movement is spreading all around the world. What I want to stress here is that, so these attempts shows that, there is this is like a mimic, it's like a mimic of science. It's an attempt now to mimic science, to demonstrate that there is an authentic piece of evidence. And you can easily debunk all of them, and you can demonstrate that this is not true if you have an alternative opinion. But this is exactly the point. In this channel, you don't get any alternative opinion. This is an echo chamber in which you are constantly fed with information from the same community that keep pumping with fake information and conspiracy theories about COVID. Let me show you also this graphic. This is based on a research of Cornell University. It has been in the first part of 2019, but still, it shows something very interesting. It shows that the conspiracy theories are not just simple traditional Nazi propaganda. Yes, there is some reference to anti-Semitic conspiracies, but you can see this is a small percentage, 1.6%. Most of the coronavirus conspiracies come and are connected to other type of ideas. One is the miracle cures, and I will talk very soon about this when it goes to organized crime. But also you see that 4.4% is about a new world order and deep state. So here we are talking about conspiracy theories such as QAnon, or like Illuminati, or like elites of globalization that are trying to use COVID to control the population and to implant a microchip, or even we're talking about crazy conspiracy theories according to which human societies are controlled by reptilians, by aliens. And then also there are theories about China as the origin of the virus, or Bill Gates that moved from software virus to biovirus. So what I want to say is that there is a culture of conspiracy, and actually this term has been invented by American historian Birkin to show that the complexity of conspiracy theories, in particular connected to the far right, is becoming much more complex, much more elaborated than the simple Nazi or Nazi skin propaganda. And it's and again the attempt is to have a larger audience to influence and to bring to extreme positions. What's the consequence? Well, the consequence you can see here, extrapolated to a piece of news. One is it was from the 1st January 2021. So a pharmacist in Wisconsin arrested on charges of sabotaging COVID vaccine doses. And a month later, there was a group of anti-vaxxers that briefly shut down a stadium in Los Angeles where there was a vaccination of American patients. It was just for 55 minutes. So those are not actually example of terrorists, but it shows what could be impact of disinformation. Let me also say something very briefly about inspired terrorism. We also found this type of disinformation on social media. So attempt to instigate individuals to use COVID as an improvised biological weapon. It was justified according to your, let's say, narrative. So either coronavirus could be presented as a soldier of Allah, or it could be presented from a far-right perspective, something that you could use against your local minorities, in particular against Jewish community or Islamic community. Also, I like to stress the importance of the poster on the right side, because this is a very effective example of a meme. So something that you can easily navigate through internet. It shows also some element of let's say hilarity, in a sense that this poster is like, it pretends to be, part of the campaign of CDC and WHO. The only thing is that the whole message is distorted. But the point is that behind the irony, there is a message of hate, a message of discrimination against local minorities, and again with the idea that with COVID, you can accelerate the fight, the civil war through which the white state will prevail. Very quickly, before finishing, let me say a couple of things about also organized crime. I mentioned organized crime. Here I want to show you some examples of how organized crime use COVID situations to build a positive image. In particular, what they did, and I'm taking these examples from Mexico, but also we found something very similar in Italy and also in Japan. So there are criminal groups, narco groups, which are distributing food or sanitizers to populations. And what they do is that they branded, they put their name. You can see now there is a Cartel del Golfo, which is one of the most, let's say, old narco group operating in Mexico. So you can see in the box, they wrote Cartel del Golfo, and even they wrote the name of their leader. And then there is another box in the other picture that you can see now the logo, the silhouette of El Chapo. So that's the narco group of Sinaloa, using basically the same strategy, supporting population, but reminding everybody that this comes from a particular group, from this narco group. You can see also that they'll be using TikTok. This is very interesting because TikTok is something for young people, for children, which means that organized crime is very much also interested to promote pass messages to young generations, to children, especially for recruitment purposes. So what is the negative side of this? Why do they want to build a positive image? Well, the reason is this, because they want to make legal or illegal profits. Because once populations start to trust, these groups, because they see that the groups are, the only one that can take care of population in a moment in which, the government has difficulties to provide financial or medical support. So once you develop a positive image, after that, you start to make illegal activities. So for example, you can start sell medicinals, and you can see, the picture on the left, or they can go on darknet. So you can see here there is the cell Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine on darknet. Obviously, there is no control on what type of products they are selling. Most likely, those products are fake or even substandards that can even cause damage to to individuals who use them. Also, you see that I selected the disinformation about Interpol that warns that organized crime plans to infiltrate COVID-19 vaccine supply chains. That's also another very interesting and very alarming element of the COVID disinformation campaign, because organized crime is very much interested to take control of companies which are facing a difficult financial situation. But when they take control, it doesn't mean that they want to have the ownership of the company. They prefer that the company remains with the same owner. But what they do is that they can control because they provide financial support. And traditionally, it is a type of financial support that becomes after that a shark loan, a loan that the entrepreneurs are not able to pay back. And so they become basically connected, they become a slave of these organized crime groups. So once you start to control legitimate companies, that's a perfect way to start to infiltrate your illegal substandard products into the legitimate supply chain. And this is exactly what they're trying to do. So they're trying to take the opportunities provided by the global distribution and need of vaccine to infiltrate pharmaceutical companies, and then after that to sell, to insert, to infiltrate illegal products into the legal supply chain. Alex, I think that's enough. Also, because I see that I spoke for more than 25 minutes. So I like to thank again, thank you and also Daniel for the organization of this event. I just leave also in my last slide famous sentence of Lincoln, which I found very appropriate to these days. And of course, I'll be happy to take any questions during the Q&A session. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Francesco, for a really a fascinating presentation. Well, I'm familiar with some of those cases that you presented. I didn't know really the depth and extent of the infiltration of social media with these kinds of messages. It is very worrying. It seems that certainly COVID-19 has provided fertile ground for these kinds of extremist groups and non-state actors to propagate their propaganda and also to even infiltrate, as you say, the legitimate supply chain. So I'm sure there will be questions for you, but I will hand the floor over to our second speaker in just a moment. And a reminder to all of our participants, if you do have questions for our speakers, please do feel free to use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. So with that, Sandra, I would now pass the floor to you for your presentation. And thanks once again, Francesco, for yours. We'll return to the Q&A after Sandra's presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thanks to everybody for being here today and for the invitation to this event. I'm trying to share my screen. Let me see if I don't know if you can see my screen. Very good, so then I can go ahead. So I found the presentation by Francesco extremely insightful, and you will see that some of the topics I want to cover today are actually very much overlapping or similar, but then we have some specificities of the EU response that I would like to highlight for you today. So let me see if I can move my presentation as well. I seem to have a problem. If you allow me just a second, I will try to find a solution for my screen sharing.
Take your time.
Thank you. Let me see if this would be better. Voila, now I can also operate it. So I will divide my presentation in 3 parts. I want to start defining the problem from the EU perspective. I then want to say a few words about the EU policy response. And then I will focus on how we have been addressing COVID-19 misinformation and disinformation. Of course, the topic of COVID-19 will be a bit of a red line through all my presentation because it's the topic of today's webinar. And also because you can imagine that working on disinformation and misinformation matters in the past year has been heavily shaped by what we have been experiencing in terms of the pandemics and the infodemics that has been accompanying this pandemic, as you all know, has been declared by WHO at the very beginning of this pandemic. So I want to start with some definitions. And this is partly overlapping with what Francesco said. So I will not go again on the distinction between misinformation and disinformation that Francesco has already explained. But I want to say that during the past year, we have realized, actually, I see that in my slide there is a little mistake because the European Democracy Action Plan that put these definitions on paper is from December 2020, obviously. In this European Democracy Action Plan, we wanted to expand the definitions that we were using. So going beyond the distinction misinformation, disinformation that UNESCO had laid out and that Francesco has been mentioning. But we wanted to enlarge our toolkit by talking also about information influence operations, which are what we have seen very much this year in terms of what has been named sometimes vaccine diplomacy. And Francesco was also mentioning a little bit how sometimes we have seen coordinated efforts by domestic or foreign actors to influence a target audience. And if we take the definition until here, this may be just a normal case of public diplomacy, but what is specific of information influence operation is that these use deceptive means, including in some cases suppressing the independent information sources and in combination with disinformation. So we see that the disinformation mechanisms get more complex, more articulated. We're not just talking about lies that are being disseminated with intent. We're talking about sophisticated operations to manipulate the information space. And the other definition that we wanted to lay out in our Democracy Action Plan is related to foreign interference. And there we're talking about foreign state actors and their efforts to, again, manipulate the information space. Now, why are we looking at all these phenomena in the European Union? First of all, we look at it from the democracy perspective. So we see that disinformation and all related mechanisms are considered a threat to democracy by Europeans. Here in the slide, you can see the data from the latest Eurobarometers, which are our regular opinion polls in all European member states. A large majority, 83% of Europeans, think that false information and all the different forms of misinformation and disinformation create a threat to our democracy. And 71% think that they do encounter these phenomena regularly. So we see disinformation and misinformation as an obstacle to the capacity for EU citizens to make informed choices, which are the basis of democratic behavior. So if you want to have a democracy, you want to have citizens able to create and form their own opinions based on facts. And if there is no clear information space around them, then this capacity is harmed. Polarization, of course, is increased. Francesco spoke very insightfully of the phenomenon of these echo chambers. These are typical examples of creation of polarization, which of course harm the free debate because make it more difficult, as Francesco mentioned, for a citizen to see both sides of an argument. We have been looking at this phenomenon also and very much in the context of elections. So how misinformation and disinformation may discourage people from voting or may harm the carrying out of free elections. And then finally, the new technologies, social media, what we are talking about today, of course, make the creation and spreading of these falsities and disinformation and manipulations much easier. And it's not only the new technologies, it's also some characteristic of human psychology, and I will come back to that, that make it very easy for some of these manipulation operations to spread very fast. So what can we do about this? Before I go to the response, I also want to say that we have been seeing for many years the EU as a regular target of misinformation, disinformation operations, foreign interference operations, influence operations, where we have seen in many cases some ideas, some news which had always a grain of truth, as Francesco was explaining before me, but then biased representation of reality, attacking the EU institutions. When we have started seeing the infodemic coming to accompany the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw even more in a starker way than before that these phenomena are not only harming the health of our democracies, but can also really harm in real life our citizens, for example, their health. So we had to sort of take account of a new step in these narratives and also increase the response from the EU side. We have seen narratives regarding public health. Francesco also was mentioning miracle cures, anti-vaccination narratives circulating a lot. In some cases, even amplified by celebrities, by influencers, which makes it more, of course, damaging and more reaching out more in a faster way. So let me go to the response from the EU perspective. First of all, I want to frame the discussion about the EU response with a quote from our Vice President Vera Jourova, the Vice President of the European Commission, who is always stressing that our response to disinformation and misinformation is focusing on making sure that our citizens are not in danger, but also very much on preserving freedom of information. This is really a way to anchor our response on EU values, and in particular on rule of law, on freedom of information, on free media. This is really the cornerstone of our response. That said, I want to start a little bit chronologically, saying that in 2015 we started by encouragement from the Council, of the European Council, so the assembly of all the heads of state and government in the European member states, who gave a mandate to the European External Action Service to create some task forces on strategic communications. And in particular, started with the East Stratcom. Now there are more geographically based task forces that look at specific cases of disinformation. The East Stratcom started looking at pro-Kremlin disinformation in particular, and has created a database starting to detect systematically all the cases of disinformation that were highlighted by a set of researchers. Here, for example, you see in the slide some recurring disinformation narratives that the East Stratcom has collected coming on the topic of COVID-19. And this is very much what Francesco was also talking about. So let me go faster to the next slide, where, keeping a little bit this chronological order, if you allow me, I want to say what we started doing in 2018, which was really a watershed moment for the EU, before the beginning of the pandemic, to really put our house in order in defining the strands of work against disinformation. The 2018 Action Plan Against Disinformation had 4 pillars. The first one was detecting, analyzing, and exposing disinformation, which was the basis to really understand where this phenomenon was going. Of course, we were seeing a very fast evolution, and there was a need, and there still is, of course, to systematically detect, analyze, and also expose what we were seeing. The second strand is about mobilizing the private sector. We realized that to address this information, we need to work together with the platforms, the social media platforms, as well as the advertisers, so working together with the private sector. We had a third pillar, which was about stronger cooperation. We have increased our ways of working together across EU member states, but also with the UN organizations, with other international organizations, with other partners, because of course this is not a challenge that can be addressed by EU institutions alone. And the last one, and maybe the most important, awareness raising and societal resilience. So we realize that if we want to fight the battle against disinformation, we need to make sure that our societies are stronger, are more resilient, and that our citizens are aware of the risks related to misinformation and disinformation, so that they grow a sort of immunity towards this phenomena. I can say just a few more words on each of these pillars, especially on the second one, on the stronger cooperation and joint responses. One of the things that we have done is we have created a rapid alert system that puts together all the member states. All the EU member states have appointed a contact person, a contact point for disinformation. And these contact persons are connected in a system that is able to allow exchange of information in a very quick way, and that allows also to learn from each other's experience and to exchange best practices. I will go back on the other pillars later, so let me just go faster here. What I want to say about this approach that we have started to implement since 2018 and that we still follow is that we believe very strongly that to address the challenges of disinformation and misinformation, we really need a whole of society approach. So we need to work together, as I said, with private actors, but also supporting independent journalism, which is a key pillar in the fight against disinformation and in the fight to have a well-functioning information space, which is what we're talking about. We realize that we need to really empower fact-checkers, researchers, civil society, while of course always guaranteeing their independence, but especially in cases of crisis like we are now, for example, making sure that they have the resources to go ahead with their work to ensure these key activities in a democracy. We realize also the importance of promoting media literacy. The European Union has launched already for a few years a media literacy week in all European member states. We work very much with a network of media literacy agencies in the EU countries to make sure that since already childhood, our citizens are educated to understand how to read the news, how to get resilient against disinformation. Other parts of this joined up approach are related to protecting elections. So we have in operation in the EU an election cooperation network among all the different member states and different institutions that are involved, so to make sure that we can protect our electoral processes. And of course, with the involvement also of the European Parliament, in 2020, a new special committee was created on foreign interference in all democratic processes, including disinformation. So you see that there are many different strands of action. Silvia was saying, opening, that it's difficult to sometimes find the right person within the European Commission that does something. It's because in this case, on disinformation, we have really a very multifaceted approach. So there are many departments that are involved, and we all work together in very strong and close coordination. I want to say just a few extra words on mobilizing the online platforms, because this has been really the key pillar of our action. Already before COVID and before the European elections of 2019, we had started an initiative that we called the Code of Practice on Disinformation, which was really the first of its kind, because it was a volunteer code that was signed by a number of signatories, including all the main online platforms and advertisers, where they committed themselves to enhance transparency and accountability of platforms, to reduce the advertising revenues for those actors that were using disinformation. They committed to give prominence to trustworthy information. And this we have seen, for example, now on COVID very much, when you see on platforms like Twitter or Facebook that authoritative sources like the WHO or the National Health Authority is provided as a first result, also in Google searches. This is a result of this kind of conversations that we started having already back in 2018. We want to, and we encourage the platforms to empower as much as possible users to understand who is the source of the thing that they're reading, has there been fact checks on this information? Is that an information that has been already reported to the platforms? And to strengthen research. Now, this, as I said, was a discussion that started much before COVID, but during the COVID crisis, we have launched a specific monitoring program with the signatories of the code, specifically to see how they could help to curb misinformation related to the virus and to vaccinations. And we have seen quite some results in terms of giving more visibility to authoritative information, taking down accounts that were posting disinformation, and giving more visibility to fact checks. So this has been an interesting experiment. Now, unfortunately, we made an assessment that while this code of practice has been useful, it has had mixed results. So the next steps will imply moving from a purely self-regulatory, so volunteer approach, like the one I just described, to something that is what we call co-regulation, where very large online platforms will have some need for accountability. So at the end of last year, in December of 2020, we launched two pieces of legislative tools, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. And they introduced some obligations for the gatekeepers, include also some transparency measures that will be obligatory, not anymore volunteer for the online platforms, and will also oblige the platforms operating in the EU to provide access to researchers. This was one of the key weaknesses of the previous phase, where we realized that researchers had very little access to the algorithms and to the data that the social platforms were holding. The last thing that I want to mention in terms of the European response is related to the European Democracy Action Plan that I already mentioned was unveiled at the end of last year, which is a way to improve the EU existing toolbox for countering foreign interference, will create a new phase of the code of practice, and most of all, will protect the integrity of elections and the safety of journalism. There is a big chapter in the European Democracy Action Plan that is also dedicated to protecting free media. Now, let me go to how we are addressing COVID-19 misinformation and disinformation. This is a part of the response. As Alex said, introducing me, I work in communications, so I'm very much involved personally in the part of the response that deals with how do we communicate externally on these topics. First of all, of course, one of the things that we do is to promote the sort of myth busting or debunking of the more urgent myths and more dangerous myths that we see. You see here some examples of web pages that we publish on really rebutting or debunking the worst myths, the most dangerous myths that we see. Some campaigns, Radiological Europe, for example, is a campaign from our office in France, or in general, other visuals that we use to promote fact-based information. You see also in this slide, I've put a little sandwich. And this is to show the approach that we use when we do debunks. We are very cautious of not repeating the myths, because we know that as institutions, we have the very big audience, and we run the risk to giving a bigger visibility to the myths than to the fact-based debunk that we want to do. So we always put our values, our narratives, and the facts in the first place. Then we rephrase the lie just to say that this is not correct, and then we go back to the fact. So that the lie is in a sandwich, and this comes from a concept of George Lakoff, a linguist and scholar on these topics that we have been following. We have also been doing our own research, and the Joint Research Center of the European Commission has produced a number of reports. I've put a link at the end of these slides. These reports are in the series that we call Enlightenment 2.0, which has been extremely important for us to understand better, as I said at the beginning, the psychological factors that drive what we call the pull factors behind the disinformation. So we can study, and we need to study and detect and analyze all the different operations that are done and the actors behind them. But we also, and this is the push part, but we also need to understand what are the pull factors, why our citizens are so vulnerable to disinformation. Why do we see in so many cases that the disinformation narratives get distributed and get a lot of visibility thanks to unwilling citizens or citizens that do not realize that they are spreading disinformation. So we want to understand why our brain, our psychology pushes us towards these behaviors. And this work that has been done by our Joint Research Center has been extremely important for us to understand in which direction we need to go also to respond to this phenomena. One of the biggest conclusions from these studies is that the thing that works, one of the things that works best, rather than debunking, which should be only sort of the last resort, is the pre-bunking and the positive communication. So here you see some of the campaigns that we do as European Commission on different topics. We realize that what we need to do is we need as institutions, and this can be helpful maybe for many of the participants today, to go ahead and communicate proactively on the topics that we know are also subject to disinformation campaigns. Not necessarily making the link and debunking directly, but pre-bunking, before the disinformation gets spread, really communicating. And on COVID, we see it very much because we see that the disinformation campaigns on vaccination, on the contagiosity of the virus, very often they insist on some very strong fears and concerns that our populations have that we cannot just dismiss. We need to address the same fears and the same concerns with our positive information campaigns, providing transparent information and access to the sources of all the actions that we know are going on. So we are doing a lot of transparent communication on different topics related to vaccination, related to the virus. And we also try to encourage a high degree of interactivity, because engagement is also what works to counteract the same fears and concerns on which disinformation thrives. The other strand of action that is very important and works very well is, again, before the disinformation spreads, raising awareness. So we do some own campaigns to raise awareness about the risks of disinformation, to try to stimulate a critical sense in our citizens as readers. We partner with international organizations. Here in the slide you see an example of a campaign in partnership with UNESCO to counteract conspiracy theories and to raise awareness about dangers of conspiracy theories. And we do also outreach to teachers so that they can have these complex conversations in the classrooms about this, what is disinformation, how to be aware, and how to be resilient to it. Another very important strand of action is to work with fact checkers, with researchers, with civil society. We have launched a number of big projects. So the biggest that I can mention at this point is the European Digital Media Observatory, which is funding with 9 million euro this year, hubs for fact checkers in the different European member states. We also have a social observatory for disinformation and social media analysis, which we call SOMA. And we have many projects that are funded by our Horizon Europe program that invest in technologies to verify the content and to track the spread of disinformation. I already spoke about media literacy, supporting quality journalism. I already mentioned this is an important part of the European Democracy Action Plan. And we really believe, we had many times in this discussion, are you, when you work against disinformation, trying to establish a ministry of truth? And we always say this is not about creating one monopoly of the truth or the news. It's about promoting a very healthy information space where there is a plurality of media sources that can work in freedom and independency and with very strong professional tools. Last thing that I want to mention is about citizen engagement. This illustration that you see on this slide was created by the European Parliament to encourage citizens to spot when news is fake. This is again one of the initiatives to raise awareness, create this resilience in society. Another thing that I want to mention is the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is a big project that is going to be launched this year. And again, it goes towards stimulating citizen engagement, debate, discussions, because we want to get out of this polarized environment, these echo chambers, and we want citizens to have the freedom to make their own opinions and express them in a way that is actually influencing policies from their institutions. So this is all from me. I know that I covered a lot of ground, so I'm expecting probably there will be some questions. I've put in this last slide a few resources for those who are interested. I'm sure that Alex and Daniel can help me afterwards to make sure that all the attendees can have access to these links. And thank you very much.